Now, on to the important stuff, shall we say? Because we know, of course, that Boris Johnson wants to see a general election. His route to getting that early poll has been blocked so far. He's going to have another go on Monday. But we have heard the details of this plan by the Lib Dems and the SNP to potentially back an early election if the EU grants that extension. Will the government be backing the Lib Dems' plan for an election that could come as early as December the 9th?
Well, look, I think we need to unpick this a little bit. So firstly, the Prime Minister reluctantly has concluded an election may be necessary. Actually, what the Prime Minister and the government want is to get Brexit done. And we have tried all we can to make sure that can happen by the 31st of October. And of course, it's worth bearing in mind that at the moment, with no deal agreed by Parliament and the EU not having granted an extension, the default leaving date is still this Thursday. So that should focus minds. The second thing is that actually the Prime Minister has also said we want to give time to the House of Commons, to Parliament, to see if we can get the Withdrawal Implementation Bill agreed before we have an election. So actually what is different about the offer, or the stunt I might say, by the SNP and the Lib Dems is they've made it clear they have no intention of wanting Brexit to be done, no intention of wanting the withdrawal bill, which did get its second reading approved last week, to be considered by Parliament. They're saying go for an election. Now, it may well be that an election obviously is going to happen. If the SNP and the Lib Dems want an election, they have a chance to vote for one as quickly as tomorrow when the government's motion is voted on. And we'll see whether they're in our lobby or not.
So you just described the move as a stunt. Just to be really crystal clear here, does that mean that the government will be voting against this when it comes to the House of Commons this week?
Well, firstly, we've got to see, obviously, in what context it comes. But as I say, there is a very clear motion tomorrow. If the Lib Dems and the SNP really want there to be an election, then they can vote for our motion tomorrow that would give Parliament time to consider Withdrawal Implementation Bill until November the 6th, when the Parliament would have to be dissolved for a December the 12th election. I think that is what we should do, which is give time to MPs to consider the bill to see if we can get the deal done. But if not, then as the Prime Minister has concluded, we do need a new Parliament, and that is why there should be an election.
Is your concern then about this plan by the Lib Dems and the SNP that it may not give MPs the chance to actually vote for the agreement that's on the table, that they're effectively trying to thwart the Prime Minister's Brexit deal?
Yes, absolutely. I think, look, we know where the Lib Dems and the SNP are. If they get their wish for an election, and the same if the Labour Party, which is extraordinary, that an official opposition whose job is to challenge the government to elections. Jeremy Corbyn has said 35 times in 2017 that he wants an election, and now he won't vote for one. If they were to get their way, actually, they were to be successful, we'd spend 2020 arguing about two referendums, another Brexit referendum and another Scottish independence referendum. I don't see any public appetite for those things. Actually, what people do want and what the government is trying to do is to get Brexit done. We want to get it done by 31st of October. We want to carry on trying to get that bill through and to be, as I say, to follow up on the MP's scrutiny point that they want more time. But if we can't do that, then it's right that there is a deadline, and we have that deadline in the form of an election on December the 12th.
You see, this is where I get a little bit confused, because you say you want to try and get Brexit done, you say that you want to try and get this deal through the House of Commons, and it does feel as if we're perhaps closer to getting a majority for a Brexit agreement than we ever have been before. So why is it that the Prime Minister is talking about an election at all?
Well, because there has to be a deadline for these things. I think that so far what we have seen, as the Prime Minister has said, is that Parliament has willed the ends, i.e. the withdrawal bill being approved, the second reading vote, but not the means, which is the timetable motion, in order for a bill to be scrutinised. A bill like this would normally have a timetable motion attached to it. Now, that's why he's saying we've got until November the 6th, which is the day that Parliament has to be dissolved for a December the 12th election, which is really the last practical day before the end of the year to hold an election. So frankly, MPs, I think, who want to get the bill through, want to get Brexit done, and it's very important. I think for the sake of the country, we've got to bring this uncertainty to an end. We've got a lot of other priorities as a government, and I think the people have got priorities they want us to be focusing on. So we need to have that deadline. If that means that we have to work all the hours, day and night, weekends, between now and November the 6th, then I hope that my parliamentary colleagues would want to do this, to get that bill through, get Brexit done, and then to say to the country, right, let's have a new parliament so we can deliver on the priorities. People will have their say, we deliver on the priorities that they most care about. Things that the Prime Minister's talked about, the NHS, about policing, about education funding, issues in my area about better broadband, mobile connectivity, for example, for the whole of the country.
Now, I know that you want to see Parliament voting in favour of an election tomorrow when Boris Johnson brings that to the House of Commons. That's a given. But what happens if MPs don't? Will the government then effectively just throw a strop and pull the legislation?
No, well, what we will do is we will keep asking for that election, and we will find ways to do that, to make it very clear that, particularly, as I say, the Labour Party, you've got the Shadow Health Secretary coming on later on, who will have to explain why it is that the Labour Party and opposition do not want there to be an election. Well, there'll be it's a motion to have the withdrawal bill to be scrutinised, and an election on December the 12th, because I think the country does want us to find a way to move this whole process on. So it's important those two things go on. But of course, there'll be other parliamentary business, things that have to be done. The government is still focusing on the priorities that people care about. We will continue to do that. But this huge issue of Brexit, we have got to find a way to move it on, and that we have concluded, I say reluctantly, in the sense that I don't think an early election or a winter election is what anybody had planned. But actually, we've got to find a way to draw a line and to move this whole process on. We've got a deal on the table. And the people who say they want to avoid a no deal, there are only two ways to do that. One is to get this deal approved, have a deal. And the second is to revoke Article 50. And people need to be very, very clear about what it is they want. If they want there to be a deal, they want to avoid no deal, we need to get this deal and this bill through Parliament.
Now, you, of course, voted to remain in the referendum. Are you at all worried that if Boris Johnson wins a majority at the general election that you want, then he won't have to try and seek a compromise Brexit deal? He won't have to try and pacify Remainers like yourselves. He can pursue a much looser relationship with the EU, even potentially no deal.
No, that doesn't. I mean, I don't think that's the Prime Minister's intention at all. He would not have put such a huge amount of personal effort and got the whole government machine to be pulling towards negotiating this deal with the EU. A deal, by the way, that everybody over the summer said could not be negotiated, the withdrawal agreement cannot be reopened. The Prime Minister achieved that new deal within 85 days, and he did that by working obviously with EU leaders. Well, he has given me assurances that he's got this deal. He wants this deal. He said that in the House of Commons last week. He wants this deal to be approved by the House of Commons. And I think that is exactly the right thing to do. And the thing is, we can't even get on to talking about the future relationship, really, until we have got this deal, this withdrawal bill, approved. We know we have an understanding of the outline of the future relationship in the political declaration. It will be a free trade agreement, and we will be concluding agreements with other countries around the world. That's the form. But I mean, I think the detail of it we can't get on to until we've got this first phase of Brexit concluded. And that's what is driving people, making people so frustrated and exasperated that MPs cannot do what they have, willed the ends by, voting issue referendum, triggering Article 50, but they can't actually bring themselves to get this Brexit phase over the line so we get on to talking about phase 2.
Now, we've been talking a lot about elections in the interview so far. I just want to have a little look at something you said back in May about Boris Johnson. You said there's no doubt he's popular with the party membership, partly because they think he's got some kind of magic stardust that's going to mean that Corbyn is definitely beaten at the next general election. I think that's hopelessly over-optimistic. So do you think that if there is an election, it could deliver a nasty surprise for the Prime Minister?
Well, nobody should ever be complacent about election results. I mean, actually, I think the mood I pick up on the streets and my constituency here in Loughborough and the Midlands across the country is that actually people have enormous sympathy with all the efforts that Boris Johnson has gone to get a deal and to make Brexit happen by the 31st of October. A deadline, by the way, imposed on by the EU. Again, something we have striven to prepare for, whether it's a no deal or whether it's getting a deal, which he has now done. But I don't think any politician should ever go into an election thinking we know what the result is going to be. We don't take people for granted, but I think people will realise that there's a very clear choice in this forthcoming election. Do you back the Prime Minister, the government's efforts to get this Brexit issue resolved, move on to phase 2, or do you back those parties who are going for more dithering and more delay, and in some cases even just wanting to cancel the referendum result completely?
I just wonder, though, if the election will also be framed by the fact that Boris Johnson has broken his central pledge, which is to get the UK out of the EU by the 31st of October, do or die. I mean, why should people trust what he says in any election campaign?
Well, obviously, people make their minds up, but I would say that people should trust because they can absolutely see all the efforts that he has gone to in order to make sure that can happen. This is Parliament's extension. Parliament asked the EU for an extension, which, by the way, has not yet been granted, to extend to the 31st of January.
It's
not clear what Parliament wants to... Well, the Prime Minister was very clear, and if you'd been asking me this interview 2 weeks ago, you'd have said, is the Prime Minister going to comply with the law? And he absolutely has done that, but he made it very clear this is Parliament's extension. Not entirely clear why Parliament wanted that extension, because we'll otherwise find ourselves back in the situation again in January, but it's Parliament's. And then Prime Minister made it very clear that he didn't want there to be an extension, and in fact he wanted to get on with getting the withdrawal bill through the House of Commons.